In the 1930s, American engineers started doing something that seemed obviously good. They built levees, tall, reinforced walls along the rivers that used to flood every few years, drowning farmland, wrecking towns, and reminding everyone who lived nearby exactly how much power the water had. The levees worked, the floods stopped, and this is where the story should end. But it doesn't. Because right now, in your own household, you may be building something that works exactly the same way, and it is quietly making your family's finances more dangerous, not less. A geographer named Gilbert White spent decades studying what actually happened after the levees went up. He expected to find safer towns. What he found instead was more damage, not less, every time a flood eventually broke through, not despite the levees, because of them. Here's the mechanism. Once a river looks contained, people stop being afraid of it. Land near the water, cheap, flat, convenient, starts getting developed. Houses go up where houses never used to go. Businesses move in. Property values climb, because now you get river-adjacent living without the flooding. Nobody's being reckless. Everybody's making a perfectly rational decision, one at a time, based on the information in front of them. The water is under control. And it is, until it isn't. Because a levee doesn't eliminate flood risk, it changes the shape of it. Instead of small, frequent floods that everyone plans around, you get long stretches of calm, followed by one catastrophic failure, hitting a floodplain now packed with homes and families who built their entire lives on the assumption that the water had been handled. White called it the levee effect. Engineers now recognize it as a documented pattern across flood control projects worldwide. The safety measure doesn't just fail to reduce total damage. Over a long enough timeline, it can increase it because it changes behavior, not just risk. The levee was never the problem. The false sense of security the levee created. That was the problem. I am Bobby, and for years, I've been pulling apart the financial decisions that look obviously smart on the surface and quietly detonate underneath families who did everything right. If that story just rearranged something in your head, subscribe now, because that's the only thing this channel is built to do, every single week. Here's the question today. For the last 50 years, the loudest financial advice in America has been some version of this. 2 incomes are safer than 1. A second paycheck is a buffer. If one partner loses a job, the other one's income carries the household until things stabilize. More money coming in, more security. It sounds less like advice and more like arithmetic. And it's not wrong on its face. A second income is, genuinely, more money. That part of the logic holds. The crack appears the moment you ask what actually happens to that second income once it arrives in the household. The bidding war nobody notices. Here is where the story turns, and it's the same turn Gilbert White made about the rivers. The second income didn't get banked as a cushion. It got spent. Specifically, it got spent on the fixed, locked-in, can't-miss-a-payment costs of the household. And it got spent there because everyone else's second income was getting spent there too. This is the core finding of Elizabeth Warren and Amelia Warren Tyagi's research, published in their 2003 book, The Two-Income Trap: Why Middle-Class Mothers and Fathers Are Going Broke. Warren, later a Harvard law professor and U.S. senator, and her daughter Tyagi went looking for why bankruptcy filings among American families with children had been climbing for decades, even as women's participation in the workforce and household income had climbed right alongside it. More earners, more money, and somehow more families going broke. The answer was housing. When a neighborhood has a good public school, every family with the means to do so wants to live inside its boundary lines. In a single-income era, the means to do so was capped by one paycheck. Once dual incomes became the norm, the ceiling on what a family could offer for that house didn't rise a little. It roughly doubled. Because now two incomes qualified for the mortgage instead of one. And when every family bidding on a house in a good school district has two incomes to throw at it, the price of that house rises to absorb both incomes. Not because anyone decided to spend recklessly, because the market did exactly what markets do. It bid the price up to the maximum the buyer pool could sustain. The second income didn't become a cushion. It became collateral for a bigger mortgage. Warren and Tyaggi's analysis found something that should stop you cold. Adjusted for inflation, a two-income family in the early 2000s had less discretionary income left over after fixed monthly costs. Mortgage, health insurance, taxes, childcare, a second car to get the second earner to work, than a single-income family had a generation earlier. More money coming in the front door. Less money left standing at the end of the month. The second paycheck didn't get saved. It got pre-spent permanently on the house. That's the levy. It looks like more security. It functions as a bigger commitment sitting on a smaller margin. Where the margin actually went. Now here's where the danger compounds, and it's the part almost nobody explains out loud. In a single-income household from a generation ago, if the earner lost their job, there was a backup mechanism built into the family structure. The person who wasn't earning could go earn. It wasn't a comfortable option. It often wasn't a fair one. But it existed. A second adult with unused earning capacity was, functionally, insurance. In a two-income household, that mechanism is gone before the crisis even starts. Both adults are already working. Both incomes are already required just to cover the fixed costs the household committed to. There is no reserve earner waiting in the wings to step up when one job disappears. There is no slack in the system at all, because the entire system was built, mortgage and all, on the assumption that both incomes would keep arriving indefinitely without interruption. One job loss in a two-income household isn't a 50% income cut that the family can absorb by tightening the budget. It's the removal of one of the two structural supports the whole financial house was standing on, with no backup support built in to replace it. Warren and Tyaggi's research found that families with children were dramatically more likely to file for bankruptcy than couples and individuals without children. Not because parents were worse with money, but because their fixed costs, driven upward by the school district housing race, they just weren't, because their deaths left them with the thinnest margin for error of any household type in America. Their own summary of the data made the point in the starkest terms possible. More American children were living through a parent's bankruptcy than through a parent's divorce. That is not a story about irresponsible spending. That's a story about a levy that everyone built together, one rational mortgage decision at a time until the entire floodplain was full. The two psychological forces behind the trap. There are two reasons this pattern is nearly invisible to the people living inside it, and both of them have names. The first is what economists call the ratchet effect. The tendency for a household's standard of living, once raised, to feel non-negotiable going forward. When the second income first arrives, it doesn't get evaluated as extra money we could save or invest. It gets absorbed immediately into a new baseline. The bigger house, the better school district, the second car. Once that baseline is set, cutting back doesn't feel like adjusting a budget. It feels like a loss. Moving the kids out of their school, selling the house, admitting failure in front of neighbors who bid on the same houses and are living the same way. The ratchet only turns one direction. That's what makes the trap a trap. Reversing course costs more, psychologically, than falling into it did. The second is the same mechanism Gilbert White identified in the levee towns: risk compensation. When people perceive a system as safer, they don't bank the safety. They spend it by taking on more risk elsewhere, until their felt sense of danger returns to its original level. A two-income household doesn't feel like it's carrying more risk than a one-income household from a generation ago, even though, by the numbers, it's carrying more fixed obligation on a thinner margin. It feels safer because there are two incomes. That feeling is exactly what allowed the bidding war on housing to happen in the first place, family by family, decision by rational-seeming decision. Neither of these forces requires anyone to be foolish. That's what makes the two-income trap so much harder to escape than ordinary overspending. It isn't built from bad decisions. It's built from the sum of good decisions, made without visibility into what every other family bidding on the same houses was simultaneously doing. The actual numbers. Consider two households, both bringing in a combined income of $120,000, both with two working parents. Household A follows the conventional path. They qualify for a mortgage based on both incomes and, like most buyers in a competitive housing market, stretch to the top of what the bank will approve, landing in the best school district they can reach. Their fixed monthly costs, mortgage included, consume the overwhelming majority of that combined income before groceries, savings, or anything discretionary is considered. There is functionally no monthly surplus. If either earner loses their job for even 3 months, the household cannot cover the mortgage from the remaining income alone. Household B takes a different approach. They qualify their mortgage on one income only, treating the second income the way a windfall should be treated, not the way a loan qualification should be treated. Their home is more modest. Their fixed costs consume roughly half of the combined income. The second income's remainder, after covering the real added costs of a two-earner household, like childcare and a second car, gets automated into a broad market index fund every single month. Run this forward. According to long-run market data, a broad total market index fund has returned an average of roughly 10% annually over rolling multi-decade periods in recorded U.S. market history. If Household B invests even $1,200 a month of that margin consistently for 20 years, they end up with an investment balance well north of $800,000, funded entirely by the same second income household AA poured directly into square footage and a shorter school commute. But the number that actually matters isn't the 20-year balance. It's what happens in month 4 of a layoff. Household B has a fully funded emergency reserve sitting inside a liquid, accessible account built from months of surplus that never got locked into a mortgage. Household A has a house they can no longer afford on one income, in a market where everyone else bidding on comparable houses also has two incomes, meaning even selling doesn't happen fast or cleanly or on a favorable timeline. Same combined income, same two working parents. One household built a levee and moved onto the floodplain. The other kept the water at a distance on purpose. What the myth leaves out. There's one more piece of this that mirrors the levee story almost exactly. When economists talk about historical middle-class financial security, the one income was enough era people are nostalgic for. They're usually leaving something out too. Healthcare and higher education costs, adjusted for inflation, have risen far faster than wages since that era, meaning a modern single income doesn't stretch the way a 1970s single income did. The trap isn't purely a two-income problem. It's a two-income problem colliding with a cost structure that was never designed around one income to begin with. That's not a reason to abandon dual-income households. It's a reason to stop treating the second income as automatic house money and start treating it as the buffer the levee builders forgot to build. The reorientation. The fix isn't go back to one income. For most families, that ship has sailed, and for many, it shouldn't sail. A second income is real financial power when it's deployed correctly. The fix is a single question asked before any major fixed cost gets locked in. If we lost one of these two incomes tomorrow, for 6 months, could the remaining income alone Cover what we're about to commit to. If the answer is no, you are not adding a cushion by bringing in a second income. You are adding a second point of failure to a system with no backup left. You are, in the most literal sense, moving your family onto the floodplain because the water looks calm right now. The engineers who studied the levee effect didn't conclude that levees were a bad idea. They concluded that levees without honest floodplain management were a trap, a structure that converts frequent small risk into rare, catastrophic risk while feeling safer the entire time. That's the exact shape of the two-income trap. Not a story about bad choices, a story about a safety mechanism that got treated like a permission slip. If this shifted how you think about your own household's fixed costs, the breakdown I put together, the one that walks through exactly how to stress test your mortgage against a single income scenario before you sign anything, is linked below. It's built on the same principle as everything in this video. The numbers that matter are the ones nobody hands you before you buy the house. The engineers built the levee to stop the water. Nobody stopped to ask what would happen once everyone believed it. Before your family locks in the next major fixed cost, the mortgage, the lease, the private school tuition, ask Gilbert White's question. Not, does this feel safer? Ask, what happens to us the day the water rises and the levee is the only thing standing between us and the floodplain we already built our lives on?